The next presenter, which is Chadwick Bassett from Sibanye Stillwater. Do we have Chadwick Bassett to present? So may you please raise your right hand, and do you solemnly declare that the facts you're going to provide before this panel today is the truth and the whole truth?
I do.
Please state your name and your designation at Sibanye.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Chadwick Bassett. I'm the SVP or Senior Vice President responsible for technical services on both the gold and the platinum operations of Sibanye Stillwater.
Okay. You may proceed with the presentation.
Chair, as an opening, I can't stand here and tell you whether the request from Eskom is both reasonable and justified. What I can tell you, though, is that it is not affordable. It is not affordable for us as Sibanye, and I'm sure for the larger industry as well. The second thing I'd like to say is that the issues of governance that are currently in the public domain also doesn't help things at all. Just on the slide, this disclaimer we normally put up. We are publicly traded company, and we normally put up this disclaimer from an analyst's point of view. So as far as the introduction is concerned, this is a response to the call for comments from yourself as Nersa on Eskom's 3 RCA applications amounting to 63.6 billion rand. We understand that this amount will potentially change to 62, as was indicated by Eskom. I think when we consider this application, we need to consider the context of the broader state of the economy, as well as I said, Eskom's corporate history and governance issues, which obviously doesn't help things at all. As I indicated in my opening, the South African gold and platinum mining industries are marginal, especially under these weak commodity prices, driven by a strong rand, which obviously, as a result of that, result in above inflation cost increases, and this is really not affordable for us at this stage. And obviously, this increase that Eskom is asking for also results in us not being able to accommodate this increase. The presentation aims to highlight the impact of this RCA application on the sustainability of our operations and on our mining stakeholders. As one of the other presenters indicated, there are other stakeholders that will be negatively impacted as a result of this increase. On several occasions, Sibanye Stillwater has presented to Nersa, citing that above inflation electricity increases are one of the most significant cost pressures we face. And I'll indicate later on, we're not saying it's the only cost, but it's one of the key costs that we face as an industry. To this point, these costs, other than the electricity, has resulted in us putting on care and maintenance 5 of our shafts and affecting 8,700 jobs in the last 5 years. Just talk a little bit about who we are as Sibanye. We are a global precious metals mining company producing both gold and platinum group metals. We are domiciled in South Africa. We both own and operate operations in the United States, our Stillwater operation in Zimbabwe, the Mimosa operation obviously in South Africa. And we are the 3rd largest PGM and the 10th largest gold producer globally. In South Africa, we employ over 63,000 people, and our operations also impact indirectly or indirectly benefiting 10 times more in terms of the knock-on effect. It's a price taker, and that's essentially what we are. The sustainability of our business rests on our ability to either sustain production or to contain the cost or to do both. Electricity consumption within a 24-hour average of 662 megawatts accounts for 17% of our operating cost for our South African gold operations. And I'll indicate to you later on how that has grown over the last 10 years. And also, obviously, is 9% of our costs as far as our South African PGM operations are concerned. Any cost increase granted will significantly impact on the profitability and sustainability of our operations. I think it would be remiss of me not to indicate how we operate as Sibanye. That's our purpose statement. Our mining improves lives, and the lives we're referring to here is the lives of both our employees as well as the communities in which we operate. Our vision is to create superior value for all our stakeholders. And we can only do that if we can successfully manage the 4 items that make up the trunk of the tree that you see there in front of you. The one item is obviously our safety, health and well-being of our employees. The other one is obviously the grade of the commodities that we mine. The third one is the volumes. More importantly for this purpose is the cost at which we produce. If we cannot do that successfully, we cannot create that superior value that we refer to. I must state that all of this is underpinned by our values, which were carefully chosen to spell the word cares, because we believe that we care for the environment in which we operate, we care for our shareholders, we care for the communities, we care for the employees, we care for our company, and we care for this industry. And more importantly, we care for this country. That's just an indication of how we stack up as a company. We are a major consumer. That just illustrates why we believe we're a major consumer and how that stacks up relative to our peers in the same industries, be it gold or platinum. This slide here, if you consider just the blue bars, will indicate to you how we as a company have tried to reduce our demand on electricity. And I'll explain to you later on why that was important, because it's a large part of our cost base. The green bars, the dark green, light green, the yellow bars just indicates how we've grown as a company in terms of the acquisitions that we've made, both in the gold and the platinum space. The dotted stack bar on the top just indicates the amount of demand that we've had to reduce over time. We normally target about a 3% per annum, which is equivalent to about 100 megawatts that we have removed from our base demand since 2013. This slide wants to illustrate what I've just spoken about early on over the last 10 years. You can see how electricity as a cost base or an input cost has increased from 9% in 2007 up to 17% in 2017. It's becoming a growing, significant portion of our operating cost. And obviously it puts a lot of cost pressures on ourselves as a producer. And as I indicated before, as part of our total cost base, this has resulted in us putting 4 mines on care and maintenance in the last 5 years. We have no control over the commodity prices. The only thing we can control is our productivity and the cost at which we operate. And obviously, the component of the cost that we would normally look at, because productivity improvements are incremental, and we would normally result in reducing our cost through restructuring ourselves. And the previous speaker has spoken to the same issue, where we would spec Eskom as a result of a decrease in demand, or decrease in sales, or decrease in volumes, to do exactly the same. This slide here just wants to illustrate what I've spoken about up until now. If you look at that red line, you can see the tariff increase over that period that we're indicating on that graph. And look at the steepness of that line relative to our demand line. You can see how over a period of time we've tried to keep our demand relatively flat, but we're finding it very difficult to compete with the electricity increase cost or the input cost, as you can see reflected in that red line. If this is granted, it will mean a 1.7 billion rand additional cost, or 30 to 35% on our already high base cost. We do take cognizance of the fact that Eskom has presented a phasing approach, if you like, with the indicative 3% year-on-year. However, what we're not sure about, and I've indicated in a subsequent slide, is what happens with the base cost relative to that 3%. Let me go to that slide and try and illustrate what I'm talking about. If you look at the MYPD3 over the period indicated on that graph, the light grey line is a CPI line. The blue line is the original MYPD3 price path. The red line is the actual price path. Yes, we take cognizance in the 2017-2018 period that the 2% that was granted was done to bring the actual price more in line with the MYPD3. However, what is problematic with the 3% indicated by Eskom is we do not know what that base is, and I'm now referring to MYPD4. If MYPD3 is anything to go by at 8%, then we add the additional 3%. We are looking at an 11% increase. As an industry, we just cannot stomach any increases above CPI. It becomes very difficult for us. There's only two cost items or input cost that we struggle to compete with as far as CPI is concerned. The one is labor, and the other one is electricity. All our other input costs, we are able to keep them more or less in line with CPI. Those two costs are the two costs that we seriously struggle with. The other issue that I must raise at this point, Eskom has also alluded to a correction with regard to MYPD4, which we're not privy of as yet. I'm not sure what that correction means. Does that correction mean that MYPD4 as a base is going to be higher than MYPD3? As I've indicated, MYPD3 was already at 8%. If I take the 3%, it's 11%. Anything above that will put us in a very difficult position as a company, and I would believe the rest of the industry would find that very difficult to stomach as well. This slide here just tries to illustrate the impact that this increase will have on us as a company. As I said, we're price takers. Our mines are very mature. So a lot of our mines at this point in time, with the price of the commodity price that we've seen in the first quarter of this year, a lot of our mines are marginal. And allowing this increase to go through in conjunction with the other cost pressures that we face will put 7 of our shafts at risk. Now the effect on both our gold and our PGM production is the number that you can see there, 653,000 ounces that we will lose if we put these two mines, either close them or put them on care and maintenance. The effect on our revenue will be 9.3 billion rand. The effect on Eskom themselves will be 158 megawatts in terms of demand that will be lost. From a supply chain point of view, in terms of suppliers and people that provide goods and services to ourselves, there's another 1.1 billion rand per annum that will be lost. As far as capital growth is concerned, or capital spend is concerned, there's another 1 billion rand of capital spend that will fall out. The direct job losses will be to the tune of 11,000 people, and the indirect job losses in terms of contractors that do business with us will be 1,426 people that will lose their jobs as a result. Also, the country will suffer as a result. When one looks at taxes and royalties that the industry pays, or that we specifically as a company pay, and the impact, we believe, is just something we cannot accept. We've presented to this forum in a number of years, 2013, 2015, 2016, and last year, citing the risk of job losses as a result of cost pressures, including the above inflation electricity increases. Since 2013, as I indicated previously, 4 of our shafts have been put on care maintenance with the associated job losses. The current spot prices And a number of shafts are currently marginal at these prices. A significant RCA tariff increase would add further cost pressures and could directly result in 7 of our shafts becoming loss-making, risking the employment, as I said, of over 12,000 people. If you look at the knock-on effect, we're talking about 120,000 people that will be affected by that. The current NYPD methodology, taking into account the previously granted RCAs, has resulted in electricity price path uncertainty, making business planning very difficult for us to do, and deterring investment into long-term projects. We do not know what this price path will look like. I've indicated before. We're not privy to NYPD4, and therefore long-term planning for us on these mature operations becomes very difficult. Without clarity on the IRP, without clarity on the NYPD4, and also the pending 2017-2018 RCA application, the impact of the current RCA, if it's liquidated over a longer period, cannot be assessed, because we don't know, as I said, what the NYPD4 base cost will be, or the base increase will be. We obviously assume, when we do long-term planning, we assume CPI-linked escalations. Above CPI increases will likely result in job losses. As I said before, there's 2 cost pressures that we face. The one is electricity, and the other one is labor. Our recommendations, therefore, is that the recovery of the RCA amount should not be allowed. Sibanye-Stillwater cannot absorb further price increases while sustaining our business. We would like Nersa to carefully consider the sustainability of the mining industry and the potential impact to the mining value chain in your review. The impacts extend far beyond just margin. It does extend toward employment, the industry supply chain, power demand in terms of the impact on Eskom themselves, growth capital in terms of capital investment into the industry, and as far as royalties and taxes are concerned, as far as the fiscus of this country is concerned. We therefore recommend, as per the previous speakers, that Eskom needs to restructure themselves in line with the sales volumes and revenue generation to avoid extreme tariff increases. We also would suggest that clarity is to be provided on the NYPD4 as well as the 2017-2018 RCA application as soon as possible. Now, the long-term price path should be linked to inflation or below. Madam Chair, I thank you. That concludes my presentation. I'll take any questions if there's any. What I'd like to do at this point, I'd like my colleague to join me just to help me take down all the questions and maybe to also help me with any technical questions that might come up.
Which we arrange and with the to come over, and will have to be sworn at the time when there's a specific question to be answered. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Nesson. I'll check with my panel members whether there are questions of clarity. Mr. Efron.
Thanks, Chair. Your slide number 11, I think we'd actually like to ask you to supply that this in writing, but you've given us the analysis of once-off increase. So if you were to take the proposal that Eskom made today, and yes, you say you don't know what the increases of an NYPD would be, but discounting that, if you just took what they proposed, and if there were no further NYPDs, could you provide us with this analysis to say what would that be? If the increase was 3% per year, would you still have these kinds of impacts? And then my second question I wanted to ask is on your conclusion slide, you indicated at current spot prices there's a number of shafts or whatever that are marginal. What do you foresee? Do you foresee this spot price or the price to keep declining? Is it stable now, or do you see that there might be an upside into the future? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fuller. Mr. Nkisi.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thanks for the presentations. My question would be that if I look at your slide 30, you allude to the fact that the recovery of the RC should not be allowed. As you understand that this is binding both ourselves as the regulator, countries with ESCOM, because we are working according to a framework. Why then we can just vouch for this stance from your side? And because you are highlighting also on your slide 11 the impact on spine. I would like to know if there are any other engagements with also involving the Chamber of Mines around alternative mechanisms to address these electricity increases, noting the price increases, noting what my colleague has just said, that what you provided is like that needs to be adjusted. I think if you can favor us with that, it's not a problem of facing. But I would also like that you provide us some kind of context, because we are talking here of mines that are already in a financially precarious position, those that are marginal and loss making, because there is there's also a combined impact where we need also to try to isolate electricity with some provisos around it, conditions around it, because to just attribute to electricity sometimes we might not be given a proper perspective. So that the provision of the context will then be important. I also note also the increase that you mentioned in electricity as a cost element. There is a thing, and vast labor is moved from 55 to 50. That's slide 8. And to say the increase in electricity, because we're talking about percentage, and not necessarily the quantum.
Yes.
So there could be a general increase if one can look at it in terms of the actual quantum. So it should be able to understand the increase as a percentage due to the cost, less of the utilization in terms of the consumption, the quantum and not the percentage. Because if for example, you're taking out labor, you would also have a situation where maybe there's a lot of mechanization that requires more electricity. So I think that if you provide the information, it will help for one to have to make the analysis easier. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Mr. Mkhize. Just one more question from my side really is to understand what would happen if there was any increase, even if you were to give a range of some sort to say if the increase would have been, say, 2%, 3%, or even a double-digit increase, just to give a sense of the Sibania's reaction in terms of its consumption and demand. What will happen if the increase is at this level or the other level? What will then happen? How are you likely to react to it? Remember, in one of your slides, you showed that your demand on an average of 24 hours is sitting at 662 megawatts. And over time, you reduced it by 100 megawatts since 2013 to 2017. And now, if you can then give an indication of the likely impact of what is proposed before us, so that we can have an appreciation as to what impact it will have if it were to be granted as is before us, what impact it will be, and what are you going to do? Will your consumption still remain constant, or are you likely to do anything, and what is it that you're going to do, and what are the alternatives?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think at this point, I'm going to ask my colleague to cover some of the technical ones, and I'll come back and cover the other questions that was asked.
So may you please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly declare that the evidence you're going to provide before this panel is the truth and the whole truth?
I do.
Please state your name and your designation at Sibani.
My name is Jevon Martin. I am a business improvement manager at Sibani Store. I'll start with the first question with regards to slide 11. We can provide some more detail to the analysis that we conducted with regards to the slide here. we can provide that information. I'll ask my colleague to address the forecasted price issue. With regards to slide 13, with regards to our statement saying the RCA should not be allowed. Why is this our stance? Well, we look at it purely from a business perspective. We cannot unfortunately afford above inflation electricity price increases. We ask that you as the regulator to please consider this as part of your evaluation within the regulations, obviously asking you to follow those. With regards to slide 11, again, there was a question around what other mechanisms do we look at to avoid potential retrenchments. As Sibanye, we continuously try and improve our business through either productivity or through cost saving. So this is a continuous effort that we go through in order to contain other cost increases that are outside our control, as potentially such as labour or electricity, and that's something that we've done throughout our operations. We do engage with other forums or committees, such as the Chamber of Mines, to explore other opportunities to reduce either consumption or contain costs of other mechanisms. Okay, the fifth question was to provide context to the loss-making mines. I asked my colleague to cover that around how these different cost pressures accumulate to the point where we have to put shafts on care maintenance. Then there was a question around electricity as a percentage of our operating costs and why has this grown. So if you look at slide 9, the grey line indicates our total demand specifically for the gold operations. There was a small uptick during the 2014 period where we acquired Cook, but in general our consumption has declined by about 3% per annum. That's a concerted effort to improve our energy efficiency. So if we look at that in the context of our operating costs have grown, or electricity as a percentage of our operating costs have grown, while our electricity consumption has remained flat or declined. Then the question was, question 7 was around what would be the impact to our consumption should there be significant electricity price increases. It will bring certain projects, the energy efficiency projects, forward, making them more viable. So our energy efficiency projects will be accelerated. We look at that more aggressively. As a company, we've looked at alternative energy projects. We haven't received those yet, but that's where we like to engage further with Eskom to identify other mechanisms to avoid the need to do that. We can provide further information to this in writing around what our consumption will do under different scenarios, and we'll put that together in light of Eskom's submission around a spread out RCA recovery. So I asked my colleague to address the forecasted pricing and the market.
Madam Chair, for us the forecast for pricing is concerned, it's very difficult for us to forecast price. A lot of the elements that informs that price is not in our control. What I can say though, in the last probably 2 weeks, we have seen the weakness of the rand, which obviously has improved our rand price, if you like, rand per kilogram price. However, we don't know how sustainable that is. It's very difficult for us to forecast on price, and hence why we would normally focus on 1, our production output or our productivity, and 2, we would focus on our cost. We try and keep our cost in line with where we think that price is going to go. And I say again, it's very difficult to forecast way ahead of time where we think the price is going to end up on the basis of us not having control over where that price goes. And hence why we need a little bit more certainty in terms of where the price of electricity is going to go. And hence why we're saying we need more certainty as far as MYPD4 is concerned, because that will give us an indication. It will allow us to consider the phasing that Eskom is referring to. And I say again, if MYPD3 is anything to go by at 8%, that will put us at 11%. 11% for us is not affordable. As I say, we're already struggling to keep pace with inflation, with CPI. 11% will be a bridge too far for us in terms of that.
Thank you very much for the responses. We take note of the additional information or responses that you are going to provide in writing. Please do so in 7 days. All right, well, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The next presenter is Nersa. I have the name of Sharon Liba and Pakamile Kubi. To share the presentation, we allocated 20 minutes for the presentation. May I, in the meantime, swear both of you in so that then once the presentation starts and then the other one can take over without me coming in again. Ma'am? I will swear both of you in and then we'll give each other a chance and then we can start with the presentation uninterrupted. Okay, may you please raise your right hand? No, one by one. You're not going to collude here. Starting with you, sis. Do you solemnly declare that the facts you're going to provide before this panel today is the truth and the whole truth? Please state your name and your designation at CUSA for the record.
Okay, my name is Sharon Mudiba. I'm the Nersa Senior Economic Researcher.
Thank you. I'll swear in the next one. Sissy, do you solemnly declare that the facts you're going to provide before this panel today is the truth and the whole truth?
I swear.
Thank you. Please state your name and your designation at Nersa for the record.
Pakamile Majola, Nersa Acting National Spokesperson.
All right, thank you very much. Which one is going to start? You have 20 minutes, 10 minutes for one and 10 for the other. We'll see how much it. Thank you.
Good day to the National Energy Regulator leadership and the esteemed colleagues in the House. Today we are going to present the Nersa submission to Nersa on Eskom's third multi-year determination regulatory clearing account application for year 2, year 3 and year 4 totaling 66 billion. Who are we? The National Union of Metal Workers South Africa is a trade union, and since 2009 we have witnessed the impact of the deep global crisis of capitalism in the manufacturing sector. Nersa has witnessed the hemorrhaging of jobs, plant closures and retrenchments. We have also seen the down variation of conditions and benefits of workers and the casualization of labor. At the center of this crisis, especially in small, medium-sized companies, has been the uncompetitive price of Eskom electricity tariffs. Nersa represents 360,000 metal workers in the steel and engineering, transportation, infrastructure, and related sectors. Our goal is to promote the interest of the members in relation to employers and the interest of the country by championing a job-led industrial strategy that can grow the economy and that can create jobs in the labor market. We are a Marxist-Leninist pro-working class formation whose overall objective is to ensure that the state intervenes in the economy and plays its developmental role by being a creator of the employer of the last resort. We obviously believe that capitalism is not a solution for the problems that are confronting the South African population. I'm now on the second page, whereby I'll be talking to the socio-economic impacts that are affecting South Africans. The burning question is to address what, in our view, is a growing national disaster of the economy, which has been affected by the deep global crisis of capitalism, whose negative impact has plummeted our economy. We have been in the recent past on the verge of economic crisis. Our economy has been the subject of downgrades by rating agencies and has remained stagnant for some time. There is a need to stimulate this economy and to create a job-led industrial strategy. It is our take that if the country is to succeed in dealing with the severity of the ailing and stagnant economy, which has rendered 30.4 million South Africans without a plate, 36% of the population is unemployed, there would need to be breaking of new ground in positioning our SOEs and ESCOM as strategic institutions that are at the center of transforming mineral energy and finance complex. We urgently need a revolutionary developmental path away from failed macroeconomic policies like GEAR and NDP. NUMSA has consistently maintained for the past 2 decades that we need to restructure the South African economy, nationalize our commanding heights and all our minerals to champion a job-led economic growth. It is important to remind our critics that the current triple crisis of poverty, unemployment, inequality is not as a result of our socialist policies which we have consistently advocated for. I'll go to the third page. We now come to the RCA application of ESCOM. Our submission in dealing with ESCOM's third-year multi-determination tariffs is consistent with the posture which we have articulated. We are making a clarion call that we need a completely new approach both for ESCOM and Nersa. ESCOM must be properly located to play its strategic role in the economy and in dealing with ESCOM tariff increase application. We must deal with the challenges that confront the economy in a way that stimulates economic growth and be very focused on the plight of our people in relation to job poverty and unemployment. The mandate of the SOEs and the DFIs should be aligned to our developmental imperatives, specifically building an economy that creates jobs and are sustainable and paying a living wage, not a poverty wage of 20 rands. It is our submission, unapologetically so, that ESCOM mandate should not be centered on chasing profit in order to satisfy the likes of IMF and the World Bank and rating agencies. ESCOM should revert back to its original mandate, that of delivering an affordable electricity tariff to business and free electricity for all. We come to the cost-reflective tariff that needs to be rethought by the regulator in ESCOM. The concept of cost-reflective tariff needs a rethink and must be achieved over a longer period of time. The tariff growth needed to grow the economy is not one based on the 66 billion nor the 30 rands increase which ESCOM is requesting to cover the 2014, 15 and 16/17 financial years. We require a tariff path closer to inflation for an extended period up to 10 years. This tariff path must stimulate the economy in mining and manufacturing to drive beneficiation and create more jobs. NUMSA is calling for the nationalization of all the commanding heights of the economy. The mines and the land and the banks must be controlled by the working class majority in order to drive a job-led industrial strategy as the only way to change relation of production to ensure a genuine, free and equal society. The RCA of 66 billion will lead to plant closures and ESCOM losing customers because it impacts the sales of volumes. the sales volumes. The strategic nature of Eskom is to supply electricity to the economy and to electrify the homes of the poor and the country at large. It can only do that if the country, it can only do so if there is adequate demand. This increase will lead to massive job losses, as we've said. And secondly, Eskom must confront the main cost drivers, which are the cost of coal, the cost overrun in capital expenditure program, and the independent power producers. The cost of coal. NUMSA has consistently called for nationalization of all the commanding heights of the economy. In the case of Eskom, we have consistently made a call that government must nationalize strategic coal mines and that must supply the national grid with quality cheap coal so that we can escape the continuous exorbitant prices of coal and deliver a competitive tariff, electricity tariff. More than 90% of South African electricity is produced via coal by Eskom. Eskom used to own and control coal mines in the past. It sold these mines and now no longer has the benefit of controlling the cost and the supply of coal. This is why NUMSA, we have consistently demanded that the mines must be nationalized to ensure that the cost plus mines must be used to determine the price of primary coal and the whole electricity tariff to champion our competitive advantage on electricity tariff for the economy and to electrify the country. Comrade Payamile will continue from the cost overrun in the capital expenditure program.
Now, where I am is at the point where we're looking at the graph. This graph outlines the cost overrun in billions. I won't go into too much detail there because we can already pick up that a lot has been spoken about with regards to the cost overrun. The only thing we want to add on that is just to say that as NUMSA, we believe that these projects, the Eskom built projects must be completed urgently to stop any more cost overruns. Now I want us to go straight into the section on IPPs. We believe that the impact of the, thank you. We believe that NUMSA regards the signing of the 27 IPPs by the Energy Minister as reckless. We say that it is reckless based on a few reasons. Number one, the assumption of the integrated resource plan was based on economic conditions which are largely completely different today. Two, we have a surplus in energy capacity. Three, the electricity demand is flat and declining. And four, IPPs lead to idle capacity which the consumers will eventually have to pay for. NUMSA as a trade union does not oppose renewable energy. We support a just transition. We'll explain in more detail what that means. What we believe is that part of the problem and why Eskom suddenly finds itself facing a shortfall is because of partly due to the IPP program. Eskom has initiated a tariff hike increase of 33% to recoup so-called shortfalls in 2015, 2016 and 2017, plus an MIPD4 estimated at between 20% and 30% for the first year, as well as 30% for the balance. According to the Energy Minister, Nersa supports the connection of IPPs. The cost overruns incurred in the completion of both the Madubi and Kosile forces us as a trade union to ask the Nersa board what the justification was for supporting IPPs in light of Eskom's heavy indebtedness and the fact that the IPPs are expected to cost the fiscus over R1 trillion. How is this different, for example, from the nuclear deal, which was proposed by former President Jacob Zuma and was heavily criticized as being too costly? A kilowatt of electricity produced by IPPs costs up to R2.14 compared to the cost of a kilowatt of coal-produced electricity at 32 cents. In 2016 alone, the connection of the IPPs and the sale thereof resulted in a loss of 9 billion rand. This is wastage, and it is done at the expense of the national budget. Besides the additional cost of IPPs, Eskom has said on various media platforms that the IPP project would mean that it must close 4 coal-fired power stations in Mpumalanga. This will mean that thousands of workers and their families will lose their jobs. Eskom's own internal investigation commissioned by KPMG last year in a report titled Economic Impact Assessment Results of 5 Eskom coal-fired power stations confirmed the following: that the power stations in fact contributed towards creating at least 92,000 jobs in that province, and that they contributed 32.4 billion to the GDP. We maintain that the signing of the IPPs was a truly reckless decision by the minister because it did not take the impact of job losses and the broader impact of the economy into account. Now we're just going straight into issues relating to corruption at Eskom. Eskom has not yet come clean on this.
Ms. Ruby, I'm giving you 4 more minutes.
4 minutes.
If you can just try.
I'm right at the end. In fact, perhaps let me just go straight to the demands which touch on some of our issues. So that's going to be on the last page of the presentation. Okay, in terms of our demands, we reject the request for Eskom to be granted the 66 billion rand or 30% tariff increase. We think an inflation-based tariff increase over 10 years is much fairer to the industry and will help to stimulate economic growth and industrialization. We repeat the demand for free electricity for the working class and the poor and affordably priced electricity for industry. 2. Eskom must change its mandate from profit-seeking to ensuring that South Africa is adequately electrified both for domestic and industrial life. What we need is free, safe and accessible energy for all, not price increases. We reject the IPP project because of the negative impact that it is having on Eskom's balance sheet. We demand that this reckless decision be reversed because it is already having adverse consequences on the economy. Furthermore, there is a very real threat of at least 40,000 jobs, or 92,000 if you use Eskom's own assessment, which may be lost as a result of this process. We reject corruption and state capture at Eskom, and we demand that until all monies which have been lost through theft or poor management be recovered first before any increase is considered. NUMSA is repeating its demand that all the boards of state-owned entities, in particular Eskom, must be reconstituted to have representations from business, labor and civil society to guarantee genuine transparency and good governance. It is our submission that National Treasury must fund Eskom for the SOE to address its immediate challenges, including giving workers their deserved wage increases. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Muliba and Ms. Kobe. If you are not aware whether you'll be able to take down the questions, yes, you will try. Okay. All right. Mr. Mkhize, any questions of light from your side?
Just one question, Chair. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks, ladies, for the presentation. Noting that as a regulator, we've got a framework within which we need to operate, and that is what you are currently doing. I noted that most of the issues you raising, they touch more on the policy side of things. I would just like to know as to how far is your policy engagements with government and other stakeholders progress as far?
As NUMSA, we use every opportunity. Would let me just answer afterwards?
Mr. Ruby, I will direct how you go to answer when you take down the questions.
Okay.
Ask you to respond to all the questions. We will try and take them down. Mr. Ruby.
Thanks, Chair. I've got one question for clarity. The first item of your demands. You say we think an inflation-based tariff increase over 10 years is much fairer. Are you saying you would agree to this increase if it was done over 10 years? Can you just clarify that for us, please?
Right, and the last question from my side is just to understand your views on the coal, on the cost of coal as you have it in your presentation. You are stating that, well, you're concerned about the continuous exorbitant prices of primary coal. What, in NUMSA's view, is the reason for these exorbitant coal prices? What do you think is the cause that led to the alleged exorbitant prices? And how do you propose that such causes be addressed? got the last question.
Thank you, Chair. Through you. So I'll then begin with the first question that asked about the policy side of things, to say that our presentation seems to be more on the policy side, and you would want clarity to find out as to whether we are engaging with government on these matters. So as you might have seen with the application, court interdict and everything that we've been doing as Nersa, it's just to show that we have not been consulted in a way that government, a responsible government, should be doing. So as Nersa, we've been left out of processes. In fact, the whole of labor and stakeholders at large, we are just being told by the ministers, including the regulator and ESCOM, as to what is supposed to be done without properly engaging us. So hence we use every platform we can get to express our views on every matter that we can get, including IPPs and all other related matters on ESCOM and energy. When it comes to the point of inflation that we've raised, we are just also giving an idea to say that this sector of ours, which we see as very strategic, as one of the strategic institutions which should be nationalized, we are just also giving suggestions to say that the cost plus of mines should be used to determine the tariffs, and we've then proposed 10 years so that we don't have to be coming here every year because of the problems that ESCOM face annually. So they should know how to manage their funds, and we've then also stated that corruption seems to be part of the problems that are then causing all these things to happen, whether we are here now and then trying to just solve the problems of ESCOM. So we are saying that maybe a longer period of increases could also help them to regulate their finances better. Okay, just to address the third question about the cost of coal being exorbitant, we are saying that actually privatization is the main cause of this. As you might have seen, there are many companies which are privately giving coal to, selling coal to ESCOM. So we are saying that the coal mines should actually be owned by ESCOM so that they could be cheaper and ESCOM could provide cheaper coal so that they can provide energy and electrify homes. So if we cut out privatization and the middlemen which have been tapping into the economic base, this would actually avoid for ESCOM to be selling, to be buying expensive coal from companies.
I just want to add, with regards to your question on the 10 years and inflation-based, I think we must just make it clear for you as the board of Nersa. We would only accept an inflation-based price increase over 10 years if all other conditions have been met. So those conditions include the provision of free electricity to the working class and the poor, and affordable electricity to industry. That would also include the demand that all monies which have been lost, whether it's through maladministration or corruption, should have been recovered before any increase can be given. So for us, it would only be on the basis of all other conditions have been met.
And also, Chair, through you, sorry, we are just also saying that instead of this price increase being levied onto consumers and the working class, National Treasury should be coming to contribute to ESCOM as one of the institutions that are trusted with our finances, and also in particular because of they've now gone to increase VAT to 15%. We trust that as the National Treasury now has enough to fund our state institutions.
We just have one question from Nersa, and we'd like, I don't know if it's possible that they could respond to us in this forum. We have raised the question of, according to the Minister, Nersa supports the IPP project. We'd like to find out from Nersa what the justification would be for supporting this project, because in our view, we believe that it is detrimental.
Ladies and gentlemen, Nersa would not, the board of Nersa would not be able to answer that question. As we sit here, we sit to adjudicate the process. So we do not take any decisions on something that is not before us. So once there's something that has been tabled before Nersa, it gets processed properly, and then it will be tabled to the members of the regulator to then consider it and they will take their adjudicative decision in that regard. So we will not be able to answer you, and in any event is beyond the scope of the applications that are before us today. But let me just check, maybe there could be some work that you could also assist us with, given your proposals here and the conditions that you say should be met before any increase that is related to inflation. Let me understand the free electricity concept that you're coming up with. And I'm not saying that you must respond to it now, but perhaps you could provide further details as to your understanding and the impact of it, and issues of sustainability of the utility, and also the other impact that you may not have considered on the general public as we regulate in the public interest. Have you thoroughly considered, the consequences and the impact of the proposal on free electricity to the poor? And when you talk about the poor, have you scoped who you're really talking about when you talk about the poor? So hence I'm saying it's not something that you can respond to here and now, but we would like you to then, given the fact that you came up with this proposal, perhaps you might have done some work and you might have seen some results that are indicating that this is something that the country can afford to do, and it will not threaten the sustainability of the utility. It will also not threaten the availability of the regulated service to the country. So have you done that kind of study for the country so that we can see how sustainable that proposal is for the country, and also the poor that you seem to be representing, whether at the end of the day it would not be negatively affected by that proposal. So I'd like you to respond to that in writing. The second thing, if you have it in writing now, the second thing that I wanted to check with you, you spoke about the uncompetitive price of ESCOM. And I'd like to understand whether Nersa has done any work benchmark study where you might have compared the prices of ESCOM in South Africa and taken into account all of the market condition in South Africa and the equivalent conditions in another market, to have come to the conclusion that the prices are uncompetitive. So those are the two questions. You can respond to us in writing within 7 days, if you could please assist us. But with the other question of the free electricity and affordable electricity, you may indicate to us within 7 days in writing as to when you will be in a position to do so.
We shall do so. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you very much, ladies, for the presentation. The next presenter is the Chamber of Mines. I have Mr. Henk Gallagher from the Chamber of Mines. We have Mr. Henk Gallagher. Mr. Langenhoven, may you please stand closer to the mic so that we make sure whatever you say is on record. Do you have any objection in taking the oath? All right, may you please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly declare that the facts that you go to provide before this panel today is the truth and the whole truth?
I do.
All right, and please state your name and your designation at the Chamber of Mines for the record.
I'm Henk Gallagher, I'm the Chief Economist at the Chamber of Mines.
All right, please adjust your mic so that we make sure that we can clearly hear what you are saying. I think you can just...
Okay. Thank you, ma'am, for the opportunity. We're very glad that we have this opportunity. Thanks a lot. I'm going to cover the five headings that you see there. The mining sector's contribution to the GDP and how important we are in terms of electricity usage as well as the supply of coal. Then I'm going to shortly look at the reasons for the RCA application and why we think it should be lower than what is being asked for. And then a little bit about the social economic impact. I think that is quite important, and from some of your previous sessions, it seems as if this is important to talk about a bit. Then about the impact on mining, and then our conclusions. The first part is mining's contribution to GDP and to the economy, just to show you how much of our share of GDP, 6.8%, private fixed investment on the right-hand scale, 20%, and earning of foreign exchange, between 25 and 30% of GDP, so quite an important part of the South African economy. Just to show you that I am actually conflicted, because we have coal mines providing coal, the largest suppliers for coal, primary energy to Eskom, and we use this huge amount of electricity. What you see there on that slide is on the left, gold and platinum are the largest users of electricity, and it shows you how important they are in terms of the overall mining sector. So in 2017, nearly 40% of total sales in mining. So that's one part of my constituencies. The other part is the coal mines, and what you see in black on the right-hand scale is the domestic demand as a percentage of total coal supply, coal sales. So 53%, roughly 50% of domestic production of coal is sold domestically, and most of it to Eskom. The next slide is actually the last slide I used when we were talking about the 20% tariff application. And all I want to say about this is that without adjustment in our energy space, in the supply of energy to the South African economy, we are, to use the horrible American saying, kicking the can down the road. So there has to be fundamental changes taking place over time. Now these things don't happen in the short term, they happen over time. So, and I'm very aware of that. When we talk to people that, and I guess one can call them the coal pessimists, they say the Chamber of Mines should be more positive about coal and hunting it. The fact of the matter is, Eskom built these large power stations for the next 60 years. They will demand huge amount of coal. Our estimates are saying that coal demand will actually grow up to about 2030 and will then only then start to decline, sorry, 2025, only then will start to decline to about when it is now in 2030. So coal, there's a future, a big future for coal mines in South Africa. The export side is of course the other side of it, but that's not what we're concerning ourselves with today. So let's go to the Eskom's reasons for the RCA, and our message is that it will probably have to be lower than what they're asking for. And the first one, I deliberately left the slide as it is. You will see it's stick and pastes of different reports from National Treasury, from the Reserve Bank, from the CIFSA, from the Chamber of Mines. In short, the economy, it seems as if the consensus is that the shortfall in electricity supply caused about a 0.5% growth impact negatively. I was shared a forum with Francois Gruppe, the Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank in 2015, and that was in his speech, and that was, if you read the Reserve Bank bulletin, and that little slide on the left is actually the Minister of Finance economic review, where he had a look at it. Now the number, the minus 0.5% growth, means 850 billion, it's not billion, it's billion, sorry, I read it wrongly. 850 billion lower GDP, average 450,000 jobs per annum. So our argument is that the causality, although, and I'll show you a slide about the commodity prices, of course that has an impact, and our contention is that the mining sector specifically and the economy could have responded much better if we had enough electricity and would have grown faster. So the causality is at least in part from not having enough energy to GDP and not the other way around. Because that is the argument. Revenue shortfall, the GDP didn't grow fast enough. And what Sibanye has said about the efficiency of the economy, I'm not covering that, but there is no doubt that that happened. The coal cost variances that Eskom is asking for. There was an agreed volume of coal to be provided, and there was an agreed benchmark price. Eskom bought less coal at higher prices, much higher prices. And the cost is in red. The savings on cost on coal, the opportunity cost of that is 14 billion over the period. Thirdly, the open gas turbines. Again, it was agreed what should be used and what was not used. And although Eskom was not asking for the full amount that they spent, they did spend it and it had to come from somewhere. So it was taken away from somewhere else and could not be applied anywhere else. So our contention is that that is actually the 14 billion that you see there is actually the opportunity cost for the gas turbines, although that is not in the application, but that is actually the cost somewhere else, which then results in that amount that has to be covered from somewhere else. If we look at the socioeconomic impact, and madam, I must say that the only way to really model this is to put it into a proper model and then throw the little pebble in the dam and see how the waves actually expand. But to give you a framework of how to think about this, the total, one can measure the economy in terms of the production or in terms of expenditure or in terms of the income that people earn while they're in production. Now, production in the economy, let's use the two, is equal to the consumption by individuals, equal to investment expenditure, equal to government expenditure, equal to exports and minus the imports. Now, if we just think about each one of those, and I tried to give you some handles to work out what the impact would be. Consumption expenditure, of course, inflation will be pressure. The pressure on inflation will be higher. Now, the electricity price, electricity is about 3% of the weighting of the CPI. So any increase that you give times 0.3 gives you the number. So if you increase it by 20%, you get a 0.6%. Each point increase in the CPI. So that would be the impact. The fact, and I believe that in other hearings, people have been talking about this, that electricity costs make it unachievable and impossible for poor people to pay. In my view, the outstanding debt from local authorities, yes, has a maladministration factor to it, but it's also giving an idea of how difficult it is for the consumers that are buying from municipalities can pay for the electricity. Poverty and inequality is, of course, at play, and there's money available for taxes, of course, and consumers find it harder than the companies to actually protect them against increases. And I'm going to show you two slides just to illustrate the CPI issue. This is a Reserve Bank slide that was used in 2015 to give an idea, but I've given you the mechanism. So any increase times 0.3 gives you the increase in CPI. This is to me one of the most fascinating slides. If you take total sales of electricity to the South African economy and you split it into intermediary demand, in other words, what the economy, the productive part of the economy is buying, and what the consumers, the households are buying, you get that scissors change. The black on the left-hand side is how companies are actually able to protect themselves against, by efficiencies, etc., and putting in their own capacity, protect themselves against electricity price increases. On the right-hand side is actually households. This gives you an idea of what is happening and the impact of this on the consumption side of the economy. Let's talk about the investment expenditure, our investment expenditure, just to remind ourselves, our houses and schools, construction by government, of machinery spent by companies, and IT and transport equipment. Now, in several of the publications from Treasury and from the Reserve Bank, the impact of less investment because of the fear of not having electricity, or I remember at the time I was in the construction sector that development of whole suburbs were delayed because the developers couldn't be certain of whether they had electricity or not. The second part is actually, to me, one of the most debilitating impacts of this. What has happened in many instances, and again, for my sons, I worked at the steel industry, we, on very good numbers, could determine that about 20% of the lower investment that were taking place in the steel sector over a period went not to increasing capacity or even to depreciation, but to putting in alternative energy sources. Now, and the number was about 20%. That is has serious consequences for the future growth potential of that sector and for the economy, assuming that in the productive part of the economy, similar reactions took place. Now, we'll have to model this. This is not as simple as it looks. I simply have good information about the steel and engineering sector. Economic growth, we talked about decline when investment is low. Economic growth is essentially additional employment and additional investment that happens in an economy. So if you invest less, your growth is slower, and of course then less employment. Let me show you, and I cannot claim that the slide that you see here is only because of the electricity shortages. But what we have seen in mining, the left-hand slide shows you what happened with mine construction. If you take fixed investment in mining and you disaggregate it into the construction of mines, the spending on machinery and equipment where alternative energy would be in, transport equipment and other spending, what you see there is in red the construction of mines, in other words expansion, new shafts, etc. And look what has happened with that since 2011. On the right hand, you have the spending on machinery and equipment. And there is a significant increase from 2011, and it is not related to wage increases. What I unfortunately don't have on that slide is what happened with profitability. Profitability went actually the same way. Sorry, profitability declined dramatically over that period. I'll show you a slide later of what happened. So the companies weren't flush to be able to spend on machinery and equipment. They actually spend, we think, to a large degree on alternative and efficiency measures, and in that way lower the demand for electricity per unit of expenditure. Continuing, so we've looked at consumption expenditure, we looked at investment and the impact on that. Then government expenditure, of course, lower growth means lower taxes for spending. On exports, and so you asked Savanya about commodity prices, I actually added a slide shortly, you may not have it on that printout, of how production and commodity prices have moved, at least in the past, but it's mainly determined by international prices. But as Savanya has been saying, because you can't control your price, you try and keep your cost down as much, because that's the profit margin that you then try to maintain. Cost competitiveness, the fact of the matter is, if the gold price comes down, or the platinum price came down from 2,500 ounces, dollars an ounce to what it is, $9.50 around now, how do you adjust to that? The only way is to cut costs and be more efficient. Imports always slows down when economic growth slows down, because the South African economy is highly import sensitive, so the moment growth picks up, imports pick up, but so when growth slows down, imports slow down. So I thought of just giving you the structure of how one should think about it. In no ways does this give you the full picture. It has to be modeled, and as I understand, either Eskom and or National Treasury are busy with something like this. Of course, inflation, I've just said about inflation and what happens there. And again, the governor, Deputy Governor Gruber, said it several times that they have no choice but to keep the interest rates higher because of the fear of inflation and what will happen. And then the uncertainty, and I'm going to try and show you in the uncertainty about electricity supply and prices, etc., but also the uncertainty about investment had an impact. Let me show you the last part in mining. The left side shows you the long-term interest rates. We need massive amount of capital to invest in our mines and in shafts. And if you look at the increase in the cost of capital over, say, from 2012, 2014, because of that uncertainty, the red on the right-hand slide, right-hand axis is actually the share price, which is also an indication of confidence. So it is of vital importance that confidence and certainty about, in this case, electricity is being maintained. Let's quickly go to then specifically the mining sector. And this is the slide I added for you. This is an index of rand commodity prices. I don't think it's on your slide, I apologize. No, it's there. I added it later because you asked Sabani about it. And this is all mining production, so gold, platinum, mainly gold, platinum, iron ore, and coal. Over time, there's a lag reaction between commodity prices and production. That's all I want to say. The question about where it's going is very difficult. In general, what we could say is there seems to have been a bottoming out of commodity prices in dollar terms. Depending on what happens to our rand, of course, will determine what happens to us. Electricity shortages and the causality, I said that earlier. The second bullet gives you what happened with revenue in total, and again, I can't claim that it's all electricity, of course it isn't. About 53 billion lower, 32 billion in value add, which is the contribution to GDP. The mining sector has not been making money over the period of this. I have discussed the investment side, and at the bottom you see the average losses of jobs over that period. Of course, it's not all with regard to the electricity prices. I just want to give you a long-term perspective on mining. And this is gold, but if you take the overall mining sector as well, the story about the sunset industry, and we're very glad that the President is saying it should not be a sunset industry, and that is actually true. Anything that we can do to keep this a sector that grows and provides to the South African economy, we will do. That is production, and I'm actually coming down to the argument that if you can't control the price of your commodity and you try to produce as much as possible, but the costs are the most important part. This is a Department of Energy slide of the cost of electricity to mining. This is the percentage share, and there's a few Nobel Prizes behind the theory behind this. This is the input-output model that shows you the yellow line. Total mining, electricity is about 6% of our input costs. For coal mining, it's the lowest. For gold mining, it's in the order of 20%, 22%. And then other mining, which is platinum and iron ore, etc., it is about 4%. Now, if you take that, and you simulate increases and you say what we've done there, I'm sorry it's not that clear, but if you say if you take a 10% increase in electricity prices, that would be the impact on output, about 0.02, on investment, minus 3.3, on gross operating surplus, minus 0.3, and on employment, 0.5. What I'm not going to go deeper into this, let me show you where this is, where the rubber hits the tack. The tack hits the road, and this is what Sabani was talking about. In mining, it's a general accepted way of looking at mining cost. We talk about the all-in cost, which is the cost, the cash cost, some spending just to keep going, in order to allow for depreciation, but also the capital investment that you have to do to keep developing your mine, to get to the ore, etc., etc. That, what you see there, is gold mining. The red line is the price of gold in rand. And that line, anything above that, all the mines above that, and we took the mine names out, we know exactly who they are actually not profitable. The numbers are in the order of 66% of gold and platinum mines are not profitable. The number that you see there, the 3.21 that we have there, and the 48,000 employees, was where we simulated the 20% price increase. So in a sense, that's the other margin of a cost increase, and if it would be applied immediately. You've asked a question about phasing it in. The real issue is cost increasing all the time, plus the margin that you want to add if you want to phase in the RCA. The slide that I said to you about the profitability of the sector, this is the one that I was talking about, and you can see from 2013, what you see there is actually fluctuation around about 20 billion per quarter is the net profit before tax. The areas where it's below that is actually where it was below that average over time, but it clearly shows you the serious situation the mining sector went through. Commodity prices did decline, but there was some improvement in 2015, 2016, which we could not follow up. And just to give you a snapshot of what has been happening with employment in mining. Now, it gives you comparisons to the last 2 years, the last year, the last 6 months, the quarter 4, which is the latest one that we have, and then the purple is the number of employee jobs that we think is under Section 189, which is the situation. And then I've simply left the 20% increase there and the number that could be.
Mr. Gallagher, I'm giving you 2 more minutes to finance your presentation.
Thank you, no problem. This is just over time employment. And this slide is probably the most important, and I can stop here. The black on the right-hand side is mining production. The left-hand side is per unit, the spending of electricity per unit of production. And you can see the efficiencies. This will not be turned around. So this is the long-term phenomenon that we're in. I've spoken about this. Here's the conclusions. We have to concede that a substantial portion of the RCA will condone Eskom's, I'm calling it, mismanagement of the utility. Eskom has to change the model from recouping cost to living within its income. It is beyond doubt that the economy is becoming more energy efficient. Perverse market signals of electricity savings leading to higher prices cannot continue. And it's beyond doubt that coal over a longer period of time, and I've been saying 60 years, will play a smaller part in the energy mix. It is important that coal is bought prudently. And the last one is probably the most important for us, is that mining does not have to be the sunset sector. If the costs, incidentally, I haven't concentrated on that, but more than 50% of the mining sector intermediary costs are linked to transport and logistics and electricity and other administrative prices. So if you think about what Sibanye has been saying, we need to cut costs in other areas that administer prices. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lam, for the presentation. If we have a piece of paper with me to take down the questions from the members. We have a writing pad here for you, Mr. Lam, so you can take all of the presentations of other stakeholders.
I was surprised that you would like to do so.
Mr. Kiss.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the presentation, Mr. Lam. I think it's helpful, particularly when one looks at the social economic impact. Zooming into this. But I guess that what applied to Sibanye in terms of questions applies also in this instance, particularly we are talking for the enumerated figures. I would like to know, because you kept referring to the 20% when the issue was around the 30%. So I just want to understand, I in other words indicating that your figures bring you to the 20% that is reasonable or not, also in view of what you presented in slide 9. Also, when I look at slide 16, you talk of the switching to alternative energy sources. Doing that create the required resilience to higher electricity prices, the forthcoming higher electricity prices. And I understand also, in terms of the submission, we appreciate also that the assumptions made are very clear because you are looking at a collusion of various factors that will mean a particular result. Hence, you might find that there could be differences, particularly when we look at issues like the rand-dollar exchange rate, etc. And I think that it will also have the updating of the slide review of the 3% that has been suggested to pay off by ESCO. I would also appreciate your comment around the coal prices, because we will observe that the challenge that we also have in terms of the coal pay costs is that once the price was going, once the demand and the utilization went down, the cost went up, the input cost, and then which then resulted in actually the consumer failing to do out of pocket in that regard instead of benefiting. So just like your comment, because we always talk of coal as the king coal being able to put us in a strategic platform, and therefore we expect to reap benefits out of that. We should also have in terms of the issue pertaining to it that will not be a sunset class. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kise. Mr. Ford.
Thanks, Chair. Slide number 8, you refer to the real opportunity costs. Can you please explain to us what that entails? What are those? And then just across your presentation, you presented a lot of stats. And the source of those stats, do you have it in some report, or if you don't, if you are able to, after this, provide us in writing where the various sets of data come from? And then your slide 28, I don't want to say lazy, but you haven't updated it from when you presented it to us in December, I think. Are you able to update the slide with the outcome of that particular process, as well as then going forward? So, if you said this was 19%, so if you took 5%, you lower that line, and then you could say, well, if it was a 30% or whatever on top of that, where the line would go, and then the proposal ESCOM made about the 3% per year, what would that do? And then slide 14, which was the one you said was quite interesting about intermediary demand and household demand. I think what you've done there is you've zoomed into that, so it looks quite big, that gap, but the gap, it's a few percent swing. But what was more interesting to me was if I took the left side of the graph and you add the two, the 60-odd% and the 50-something%, you get to more than 100%. And then the other side is less than 100. Maybe we could just clarify that for us, please, because it doesn't make sense to me.
Thank you, Mr. Foley. My question of clarity is on slide 5. The 3 binding constraints. So you've identified the 3 issues there. One is the overcapacity in electricity generation, as well as the rising ESCOM debt burden and the lower electricity intensity of production. I just want to understand, what do you think will be the impact of these constraints, the 3 constraints, particularly the overcapacity, given the fixed cost recovery argument made by ESCOM, that when we have this overcapacity and you're building more, and the sales volumes are coming down, so there's less output, and there's an argument of a fixed cost recovery. as well as the increases in the electricity prices. What do you think will be the impact of that going forward? Now, you also stated that no tariff adjustment with structural adjustments is something to be considered. What would be the problem that the one seeks to deal with here with the restructuring? I just see it coming up, and I see it here in your presentation as well, but I'm not getting the benefit of the need and what are the areas that seem to be a problem which the restructuring will address. If you could just clarify that for us. And then when it comes to the elasticities, on the elasticities, I think you mentioned the outcomes in terms of your own output, the decrease in total mining sector output, but you didn't touch on the consumption levels. What would happen to the consumption levels on electricity? If there's an increase of 10%, that example that you have provided, of the increase of 10%, what then happens to the consumption? You already mentioned what the impact will be on investment as well as output, but not on consumption. If you could respond to this, thank you.
Thank you to all of you. To start from the top, the 20% is just illustrative of course, to do an analysis. You have to have the right number of what will happen. So I've used the presentation that we made and the submission that we made around the 20%. Give you, like I said earlier, in a sense, an outer cost impact of what would happen. And we cannot date it. I mean, of course, it's the same problem that Sibanye is. How do you know what the cost is going to be? So you need to know that first before you know what the cost is. Of course, the mining sector is resilient, and it is, like we saw the example, has been cutting down on its electricity consumption or energy consumption. It is not possible for the sector to actually install the capacity that it needs to replace this. That's not possible. The sector is energy intensive. What could happen is that as the costs rise, the resource that can be exploited becomes less and less because the cost becomes higher and higher. So that is what happened. I'm very tempted to tell a little joke. My grandfather always said there was an old man that tried to teach his horse to stay without fodder, and just as he got used to it, he died. So that is to a degree true about mining as well. We need lots of energy, and we can't be without it. It has to come from somewhere. The cheaper, the better. I agree that the assumption about the increases and the phased increase, we will have to come back to you about that. Coal prices, in our view, could have been lower domestically if Eskom didn't change the way it was buying coal. The investment model that has now been returned to, where the mining right had to be obtained and then the capital investment was funded by Eskom, changed in the period, and therefore the coal had to be trucked in from other areas to the tune of 333 million tons, which increased the prices. What we are concerned about, and what has happened to a degree, is that investment domestically, maybe I should just go one step back. The international price for coal is double what the domestic price is. So the signal is invest in export coal. The fact that the domestic price and the model of investment, the low price and the model of investment changed, no or very little investment took place for Eskom's purposes for domestic supply, as well as the switch in the ownership of the mining companies in coal. So our contention is that it can be much cheaper to provide coal to Eskom if it is done closer to the older norm. Not necessarily old companies don't think we are agitating for going back to everything as it was, not at all. The next question I wrote down, the opportunity cost. The opportunity cost is what had to be spent on buying the coal instead of buying it at a lower price. So what was actually spent versus what was agreed should have given us what was agreed in terms of price and volume should have given us a higher saving than the actual. Although the volume was lower, but the prices were much higher. So on that's the opportunity cost. So, and it had to come from somewhere. And then the OCTTs, the table that I had, I was able to get it back now quickly, but the money was spent. There was 13 billion spent. It had to come from somewhere else. So they had to, you cut the cake in different ways, but it's still the same cake. The data that I'm using, 99%, I will give you the sources, absolutely. I'll update the slides for you and give you the sources. Virtually all of it is national data. It's not our own data. The calculations around, for example, the impact from the increases, that's a chronometric analysis that we do, but we can give it to you. But the base data, everything is either DMR, National Treasury, Eskom itself, the Statistics South Africa. So we have in the past collected a lot of information at the Chamber of Mines. We're still doing it, but we're using national data because of the credibility of the data. We will update the cost curve, absolutely. The switch between consumers and intermediate, I'll have to check that. It's national data, input-output data, coming from StatsSA, and it shows you the intermediate demand and the consumer, the households demand. So I'll just make certain that the data is right. And you are right, because of the two axes, it looks as if it was a major split. The issue around fixed costs are true for all concerns in the economy. If you don't have the income to sustain that fixed cost, you have to make an adjustment. And I'm not answering the question, but that is the rule. If you look at the fixed investment, the fixed capital base of mining and the capital base of Eskom is very close to one another. Mining is adjusting, and we suspect that Eskom should do the same. The IRP, of course, which we are waiting in great anticipation for, will to a degree give guidance about what the mix of electricity provision will be and where this fixed cost will be. But I have no doubt that there will be a change in, if you can imagine yourself, a cone where the top part is coal at the moment, which will become lower as years go on, and alternative energy will become the biggest part of that provision. The elasticities are estimates also coming from input-output models, so it's actual data coming from there. We can give it to you. You said that we didn't give the impact on consumption, on expenditure. I would venture to say that the easiest way is to actually use the Savannah numbers. It would be that, and Savannah is in the higher consumption portion of mining, so it ought to be a little bit lower than what they have. So gold mining and platinum mining are the highest consumers of electricity in the mining sector. So one would be able to do that for you. It's not difficult working from first principles. It's actually not that simple. I hope that helps. It's not the final answer of typical economist answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robin. We look forward to to receiving the additional information. Thank you. We're moving on to the next presenter, and we have Mr. Terry McNay from Free Market Foundation. evidence you're going to bring before this panel today is the truth and the whole truth?
I do.
Please state your name and your designation at the Free Market Foundation.
My name is Kerry Markman. I'm a board member of the Free Market Foundation.
All right, you may proceed with your presentation.
Just briefly, the Free Market Foundation is an independent, non-profit organisation. It was founded over 40 years ago to promote fundamental classical liberal principles, including an open society, the rule of law, personal liberty, economic freedom, press freedom, and finally, human rights and democracy. We now know that Eskom wants 67 billion rand. I haven't been at all your presentations, but it may have dropped since I last heard that. I want to present, my whole presentation is based essentially on this one slide. This tells us that over the past 10 years, Eskom has increased the tariffs something like 356%, whereas inflation has gone up 74%. Why the huge increase? I suppose you, Madam Chair, and your panel probably know the reason much better than I do. But when one reads in the papers and so on, it's quite clear that there are elements of gross inefficiency, poor management, maladministration, corruption, high wages, and the overspends in the duplicate proceeding, and so on and so on. What about the impact on the country? Well, you've heard some of the miners tell you about the impact on them. You've heard some of the unions tell you the impact on them. I believe we have untold damage to the country. There's been a reduction in manufacturing and mining investment. Companies are not investing or slowing down their investing. Overseas companies are not coming in. We're not getting any foreign direct investment. We've had jobs lost. In short, Madam Chair, this has been a total and absolute disaster. There's no other word to describe it. What should Eskom get? Well, the EIUG, as you've seen, suggested they should cap it at 40 billion rand. Well, I guess that's better than the 67 billion rand. They've also said grant nothing until the costs have been prudently and efficiently determined. That is, of course, your role. You have the evidence through your ongoing monitoring that the costs have not been prudently and efficiently incurred. The degree to which this occurred, you would only know. The Electricity Regulation Act also says you can only compensate those entities that are efficient. What should Eskom get? Well, the EIG continues and says that 44 billion rand relates to the lower sales volumes. 101 economics will tell you that if you increase your tariffs, you get a lower demand and you get a lower revenue. And so when you increase your tariffs again in the future, if you do, you're going to get a further lower demand and further lower revenue, which is going to be a vicious cycle. I believe that you should not be giving them 67 or 40 or 20 billion rand. You need to grant them nothing, absolutely nothing. That is what they deserve. Any grant that you give them says, well done Eskom, please continue with your gross inefficiency, your poor management, your corruption, your high wages. We need to send Eskom, you need to send Eskom an extremely strong message that says, enough is enough. Eskom must do what companies do when they are in financial trouble. They must reclaim any stolen money, they must claim against any illegal contracts. They must become efficient. They must reduce their enormous wage bill, and they must sell off their assets. Yes, I'm afraid they must privatize, which is something that Nersa will not be happy with. Or else we're going to get more of. And I go back to the slide over here. This enormous increase in tariffs over and above inflation. What we have is some sort of insanity going on. And you know that the sure sign of insanity is to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different outcome. It just won't happen. Incidentally, that was wrongly attributed to Albert Einstein. But Chair, we need to get some sanity in this industry. So what should Nersa do? And this is where I think Nersa plays an important role. That you can say to Eskom, we are not going to give you any grant, and we're going to do the following. We're going to promote, we're going to tell the department, various government departments, to address the fundamentals. And I want to spend a few minutes on what I believe are the fundamentals. And this is somewhat in the policy field. And you can also tell NetLac, incidentally, who are looking at the Eskom's business model, what the fundamentals are. You are an independent and objective organization, so you could tell the government what the solution is. You have the knowledge and you understand policy, whereas Eskom do not. They are operators. And if you want, the Free Market Foundation is more than willing to assist with this. The fundamentals, and most of you here will know what they are. We need an independent transmission grid. We need competing power generation. The element of competition in the economy is probably the most powerful forces that exist. And without that, you end up with results of increasing tariffs and inefficiency. Independent distribution grid. We also need deregulation, Madam Chair, to increase this competition, this important element of the industry. Eskom should sell its assets to pay for its debt. The other fundamental need is to create an energy market. And what I told you there, of course, you would know as well as anybody else, is nothing new. It's all been included in the 1998 white paper, the ISMO bill, the NDP, and so on. If you go through those, if you implement those policy and fundamentals, we will then achieve energy security. I'm just going to briefly run through those various policy proposals. An independent transmission grid, which is now international best practice. And there you have a case where all electricity producers will have access to the grid on equal treatment. I know, and it's very unable to tell you the detail, the cases where Eskom has not allowed equal access to the grid, to the great detriment of the industry. As somebody said, Eskom must no longer be the referee and the player. The referee must be an independent referee of the grid, and the player, one of the players can be Eskom and other people. Generation, we need to introduce competition to bring prices down. For example, we've seen that with the IDP renewable prices, which have come down quite dramatically. We must separate the generation entities, sell off the power stations by tender, even those old power stations we sold, even if they're sold at a nominal price. There's already, I believe, 5 to 10% in private hands. The private sector generation will be efficient, reliable, and well maintained. They will invest in energy, as we've seen with IDPs. A brief example where competition is shown to give the best results. In the EU, where 27 countries introduced competition, prices fell by up to 20%. The UK broke up the electricity monopoly, and prices took 20 years to double. The US has a multiplicity of competitors, and there the prices are also reasonable. The distribution grid should be independent, everybody equal treatment, and introduce competition wherever possible. In New Zealand, it's very interesting that you can now pick up the phone and get a different supply if you want to. That's what we want. We want consumers to be able to choose who the supplier should be, so that you keep the producers on their toes all the time. And most important of all, you need to deregulate. By deregulating, you will increase the competition. You should be allowing anybody to produce electricity and sell it to anyone else. And this is something that you people have the power to do. There seems no reason why, if somebody is off-grid, why they could not sell it to a neighbour. I understand that it's illegal at the moment, but there should be no reason why a farmer, for example, could not have a little hydropower on his farm and sell it to his neighbour. Perhaps only safety regulations would be required in that case. And it should be also possible to wheel through the national grid with, again, only safety and technical requirements, no economic regulations. Sell off the assets. Eskom must sell off its assets to pay for its debt, as I said earlier. This is what companies in financial trouble do, and we must introduce an energy market to keep the prices down. You can set your maximum prices, but please allow competition to bring the prices down, which they will do. We've got the SA power pool already. There's an energy market to a certain extent that can be extended, day market and so on. Energy security. I believe that applying these fundamentals will lead to energy security and we will have no more blackouts. I want to make one final reminder, and I make no apology for showing this slide for the third time. If there is one picture that I think that shows what a disaster we've had over the last 10 years, it is this picture. There is no other industry that I know of that has increases of this magnitude. And you've heard from the individual players the impact, the negative impact it's had on their business. In conclusion, I'm saying grant Eskom nothing. I believe your last year's increase, which I think was 2.2%, was too generous. Nersa must tell Eskom, DOE and everybody to establish an independent grid, to introduce competing power generation, sell off the power stations, establish independent distribution grids, deregulate, very important, deregulate, increase competition, sell assets to pay for the debt, create an energy market, and then we will get energy security. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you for the presentation. If you have a piece of paper with you and a pen to take down the questions, I'm going to start with Mr. Philip.
Thanks, Chair. Mr. Markham, so this graph that it's shown 3 times that. Now, I've got a question about it. You see, because for me, when I look at that graph, it almost seems to be telling us that the Eskom tariff increase, or the Eskom tariff, is actually becoming decoupled from inflation. So, can you explain to it? Because to me, it's almost like when we consider, and one of the things we consider is the impact of increases on the public, etc. It's almost like, well, it doesn't matter, and you're saying that by the dotted line it's going to increase, this decoupling. It doesn't matter what rate the electricity price increases at, inflation is hardly going to be impacted in the same way. Can you just explain that to us, please? And then the second part I wanted to ask you is, I think that your slide number 10, there's quite a few things that you said that Eskom needs to do. Now, it is saying that, if you look at their presentation, they're saying they're doing a lot of those things already in the process. But they're also saying that in terms of sustainability, they need this money, some of it or all of it, to remain sustainable. So if you say give them nothing and then they implode, there's nothing to save anyway. What's your view on that? Are you saying let everything implode? Because then I think there'll be other impacts, national impacts.
Thank you, Mr. Furi. Mr. Kiss.
Yeah, I think, thanks, Chair, and thanks for the presentation, Mr. Mayor. For my side, noting where that we are operating within a frame, and that they need to also juxtapose the position of Eskom from the point of sustainability and socio-economic impact. It's nothing really, you see just only being the solution in light of. I'm asking noting that we're operating within a framework, and that looking at ESCOM's position in terms of sustainability being juxtaposed with the socio-economic impact for the country. Do you still maintain that nothing is actually the path to go? And then that is one. And then secondly, as I'm listening, I'm also getting a bit concerned from the point of view that some years ago, when I used to be a government official, I always said that government maintains an open door policy when it comes to policy formulation and development. And here we are with the reputable or established organizations citing, raising policy issues with no reference to maybe attempts or progress with regard to engaging with the policy makers to address these challenges. I think I would therefore request from you just to clarify to us if you've had any engagements or attempts to engage on these issues, because they are of a policy nature, which then the regulator, they kind of out of scope except to provide the advice that is required from us in terms of the legislation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Akese. Mr. Martin, I just want to understand on the issue of some of the things that you say ESCOM has not done right, including inefficiencies. Do you think that ESCOM admits that it has encountered inefficiencies that were actually within their control? Is it your view on that when based on ESCOM's presentation, that they do admit and accept and own up to inefficient outcomes which we have seen, that indeed some of those inefficient outcomes are due to their own actions, to their cost? Do you believe that ESCOM has owned up on that, or does it even admit? What we've heard is that ESCOM says, well, even if that happened and you view it as inefficiency, ESCOM has taken the best decision it could have taken under the circumstances, and therefore the presentation, most of it says, well, it is prudent in their view, some of the decision that they've taken, irrespective of what you see as inefficient. They say, yes, you may see it as inefficient, but we have taken decisions that we view as prudent under the circumstances. Do you believe that ESCOM admits that there are any inefficiencies in the business, in the way that the business is run? And then coming to the second question, just to understand on the issue of the trade-offs that perhaps one needs to also pay attention to, when you say that nothing should be granted at all, just to have an understanding of the impact of that. If there are certain genuine costs that ESCOM has incurred, costs that are beyond their control. When I say beyond their control, I'm talking also about inflation-related costs and all of those. That even those costs, you are saying that they should not be granted at all. So if you're looking at the impact of not granting at all, and the impact of not having electricity supply in the country, where would you say would sort of draw the line, and where would the trade-offs be? Thank you.
Your first question was to do with the graph showing the inflation rate. Well, I mean, you can show a graph if you want to, just of ESCOM's increase in tariff, which according to this information I've got was 356% in 10 years. And somebody may say, what, if you're living in a country where there's an inflation rate of 500% over that 10 years, and it's not relevant, but the inflation rate is really a basic way of comparing anything else. So it's very important to have some sort of look at the inflation rate. Over the same period, you can see the inflation rate went up 74%, but Eskom went up 356%. Now, I stand corrected, but if anybody can tell me of any other industry that's gone up in that amount, I would be very welcome to hear such. Most industries are going up at inflation or below inflation because there is ongoing competition. Eskom does not have the ongoing competition, and so they can do that. And what I'm saying to you is that that policy needs to be changed and there needs to be competition introduced. You then said, I think something about let's be sustainability and the impact of no increase, which has been raised a few times. Madam Chair, this is going to be going on for a long, long time. At some stage, South Africans have to draw a line in the sand and say, as I said, enough is enough. I personally am prepared to bite the bullet if Eskom does have more blackouts and so on. But we have to stop somewhere. We cannot, as I said, keep patting them on the back and saying you've done a terrible job, but keep doing this terrible job. You have the opportunity now to say enough is enough. Send them a message and let them go and do some of these things. They can sell their assets, they can become more efficient, they can stop being corruption, they can stop these overruns of, I believe, 100 or 150 billion rand in the Duke Casino and all that sort of thing. It just cannot go on forever. We don't have a bottomless pit, in spite of what Nersa says, that the Treasury can pay for everything all the time. It cannot. SAA is costing us 20 billion rand over the last few years. Gentlemen, we have to stop this. These are rands that are produced by the private sector, only the private sector producing this wealth. They are being taxed and it's being wasted. I'm sorry to say, I can see no other way but saying to them, stop now. At what level? If you want to give them a 1% increase, which is a slap in the face, that's fine. But do not give them any increase. They're not justified. I also believe, and I don't have the expertise to do this, but I also believe that if you go into their books in enough detail, you will find that they have not been prudent and they have not been efficient. And therefore you have justification for not doing it. And if the Energy Regulation Act is correct, you cannot legally give an increase to anybody that is inefficient. And this is what they are. I was asked whether we'd opened up the door to policy. Well, the Free Market Foundation has very limited resources. A few years ago, we had a very active energy policy unit, and we have a number of workshops with the private sector and with the government, and we have on a number of occasions made submissions. Unfortunately, there are so many policy issues that we are dealing with all the time that we cannot devote our attention totally to them. We are always willing to talk to any government official, and we have done in the past. As I said, we had workshops and so on. Madam Chair, you asked about the inefficiencies. I didn't come prepared with a great detailed list of the inefficiencies. It's almost like saying to me, is the world flat or is it round? For anybody to believe that Eskom is not running inefficiently, I think that is unbelievably poor. The assessment. I mean, even this morning or yesterday, I can't remember, but this business with the buying coal. Optimum has sold the coal, had I think a contract to sell to Eskom 10 million tons, and they sold 4 or 6 million tons, I can't remember. They sold it to Eskom at 150 rand a ton, and then they sold it export at over 1,000 rand a ton. Eskom did not ask them to maintain their contract; they just let them off. They provide a shortage of coal to, I think, in places where they're having problems now. Now, how do you describe that if that's not inefficient? You have a contract with somebody, provide me 10 million tons of coal at 150 rand a ton, and you don't keep it up. If you call that by some other name, I'm happy to call it maladministration, call it what you want, but it's certainly not efficiency. And then the big problem again is the trade-offs. What happens if we say to Eskom, do nothing? Well, at some stage, Chair, you have to. Recently, one of the economists wrote a little story about SAA saying exactly the same thing. You have a child that's running around, screaming at you, I want another sweet or something like that, and you pat him on the back and you give him another sweet, and the next time he runs around and he screams some more, you have to give him another sweet. At some stage, you have to tell this child, and I'm afraid to say Eskom is very much like a child at the moment, you have to say to them, no, I'm not going to give you another sweet, and behave yourself. And the sooner you do that, the better. I think the very, very sad thing is that we didn't do it 10 years ago or 15 years ago. I don't know if they were quite general questions, so they're quite different answers specifically.
Thank you very much, Mr. Buckman. Thank you for your time as well as your views on these 3 applications. Thank you. We're going to take the next presenter. It's going to be Martin Kingston from Nersa. Do you have Nersa here? Mr. Kingston, will you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly declare that the facts you're going to present before this panel today is the truth and the whole truth?
I do.
Please state your name and your designation at Nersa.
Yes, Martin Kingston, I'm the Vice President of Business Unity South Africa.
Thank you very much. You may proceed with your presentation.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. May I start perhaps, Madam Chair, by saying that it saddens me that every time I stand before these hearings, I feel like we are taking Eskom to task, and we're not acknowledging where progress is being made. And perhaps that's how I should start, because since the last time I stood here on behalf of Business Unity South Africa, and I think it's known that Business Unity South Africa is the apex business organization in South Africa, representing some 80 different categories and constituencies of members, and being the official business representative at NEDLAC. Since the last time I stood in front of Nersa in the hearings, we've seen some very significant changes at Eskom, and I think we should commend the new board and the shareholder as well as the government for trying to steer this particular and challenging enterprise into a more stable and constructively contributing future. Unfortunately, this presentation is in many ways a look back. It's a look back at expenditure that was incurred, whether prudently or otherwise, relative to submissions that were made in respect of multi-year price determinations that had taken place previously. And perhaps that's where I should start. We believe that the tariffs that are adjusted to the RCAs should be as a result of revenues that have been varied due to no fault of Eskom, and I stress that on the one hand, and prudently incurred operating costs on the other hand, not overheads. That's quite explicit in the Nersa RCA principles. The MYPP3 application, and I presented the BUSA position then, provided for a 5-year forecast, was revised under the RCA for the 2013-14 period, providing for a new revised benchmark, and that's what we're considering in these hearings against which these 3 RCAs are being considered. I should stress that we in no way underestimate the importance of Eskom to the SA economy. In fact, I think I've said repeatedly, both here and on many other fora, that Eskom is, in many respects, a proxy for the health and well-being of the South African economy. And to the extent that it isn't seen to be viable and credible, then we all suffer. We've assessed these RCAs extensively. We provided written submissions that I know you have, which address both material and less material considerations, so they're rather extensive. In this presentation, we're going to focus our attention rather on areas of disagreement and the most material elements of our submission. Those areas which we do agree with, we haven't taken time to address this presentation in the interest of expediency. The final point that I would make on this slide is that to the extent that an RCA recovery is approved, then it needs to be phased in and implemented in a manner that would ensure the continued affordability of energy. With respect to previous presentations that have been made, Madam Chair, I would have to make the observation that someone is going to pay, unfortunately. It's either going to be the consumer or it's going to be the taxpayer, but at the end of the day it's going to be the country at large. We're all going to have to pay. We need to make sure that the right party pays for this application. As we know, the major significant concern is the so-called death spiral. We have to arrest it. Higher tariffs result in lower consumption results in high unit costs, and so on and so forth. We are deeply concerned, we've made this observation before, that the ongoing cycle of applications have contained and continue to contain over-optimistic demand forecasts, which ultimately result in revenue shortfalls, and they cannot continue. By the same token, and again there's been reference to the IRP, the changing structure of the economy and of the sector has to be taken into account when forecasting demand. So whilst we agree that tariffs need to be cost reflective, based upon appropriate costs to ensure a viable ESCOM, they need to be affordable to avoid the death spiral in which we now find ourselves. And prudent cost control in that regard is essential. The consumer cannot be expected to pay for imprudently incurred expenditure, for costs that are not in line with industry standards, or with higher costs that are associated with policy decisions, outside indeed even of the ambit of ESCOM. This is a summary of the RCA applications. I'm not going to focus on it, we're all familiar with it. The areas that are shaded are the areas that I will focus on in this presentation, rather than the entirety of the slide. But the observations that I would make are that 67% of the RCAs account for a tariff increase of more than 35%, 67 billion rather I should say, of RCAs, of more than 35% phased in or otherwise, and 66% of the proposed adjustments related to revenue recovery. And that notwithstanding shortfalls in energy sales, there's been significant primary cost overruns, particularly in the early years of these RCAs. In terms of revenue variance, the approved revenue is based on demand expectations at the time, that's the principle, as is the fact that ESCOM is entitled to recover the shortfall in the approved revenue if it occurred due to external factors outside of ESCOM's control. In fact, the RCA applications provide for a 44 billion rand recovery of revenue relative to the revised benchmark, with immaterial adjustments for demand reduction. Our assessment at BUSA is that actually volumes fell 4% below target. We believe that the requested demand reduction and load shedding, which was in the first 2 of the 3 years, 2014-15 and 2015-16, contributed meaningfully to reduce sales. And we'd further observe that it seems as though discounted tariffs on international sales resulted in average tariffs falling short of target. We recognise that ESCOM needs to be able to recover its fixed costs, and it has accordingly recommended the recovery of 70% of the revenue shortfall, equal to an estimated 30 billion rand. We recognise that that may not be consistent with RCA principles, which actually do not provide for a recovery of overheads at all in these circumstances. If these principles were to be applied strictly, ESCOM would not be entitled to any revenue adjustments in 2014-15 and 15-16, as it was then unable to meet demand. As you know, we were in a load shedding set of circumstances at that stage. I'll elaborate further. And the adjustment in 2016-17 would be limited to just under 12 billion, 11.9 billion, as the SA consumer should not subsidise international sales at reduced tariffs. We don't believe that ESCOM can recoup revenue shortfalls in respect of volumes in which it had insufficient capacity. We think they should be disallowed. In fact, our submission provides for a generous recoupment of 30 billion rand. However, that weren't the case, the recovery should only be 12 billion rand. And should Nersa approve our suggested mechanism, then the fixed costs need to be verified. It's a theme that will again come through in this presentation, that we need to ensure that you are satisfied that all of the costs have in fact been incurred, that those costs are verified. On primary energy costs, notwithstanding the reduced demand, overspend amounted to 36.5 billion rand over 3 years, relative to the approved costs. They're seeking to recover 24.2 billion of those overspent costs. Again, it is set out on this table. The primary difference relates to the under-recovery in respect of OCGT costs. I'm not going to go through this table in detail, you have a copy of it already. But I would point out that if you look at the bottom of this page, approved primary energy costs of 200 billion over the 3-year period, 60% coal, 20% IPPs. In view of demand falling short some 4% of target, a prudently operated ESCOM should indeed have reduced costs, not increased them by some 8 billion rand. If we look at coal costs, the principle is that ESCOM should reimburse the consumer for lower volumes. It's entitled to recover costs for overruns on only prudently incurred expenditure. In fact, according to the application, coal consumption was 10% below target, which is of course indicative of the impact of delays in the build program, and the unit costs were significantly higher than the Nersa approved costs, 10% in 2014-15, 22% in 15-16, 13% in 16-17, resulting in a net recovery from the consumer. There's no reference in the application to wasteful expenditure, which we believe are reasons for significantly more expensive coal and indicate that it was within ESCOM's control. So our assessment there is that we have proposed an indicative adjustment based on the actual volume variance and unit costs, capped at 10%, in fact above Nersa's approved costs, which already provided for an annual escalation of 10%. As you can see, our assessment suggests that in total there should be a repayment of 6 billion rather than a recovery of 3.5 billion rand over the 3-year period. We think there is indeed a strong argument that only the volume adjustment should be allowed, as the MYPD3 process capped cost increases at 10%, and wasteful expenditure could have a material impact on tariffs. I don't need to comment on that, it's been in the public domain, but all costs need to be scrutinized for prudency. In the case of OCGT costs, the principle is that it should only be used for peak demand, and overruns should be recovered based on average coal costs. We think here actually that actual OCGT use exceeded approved use in the early years. We know why, because of the load shedding resulting in a cost of 18.8 billion over the review period. We think that ESCOM has applied, by the way, the correct principle on the average coal cost. Our only comment here is that although the recovery is in line with RCA principles, diesel storage and demurrage costs in 2016-17 should be disallowed. That's 208 million, and that Nersa should confirm the average coal cost of 28 cents per kilowatt hour. With respect to other primary energy costs, the principle is that ESCOM is entitled to recover costs on prudently incurred expenditure. We go through the details here on the slide. Again, we don't comment in detail. We have insufficient information to quantify the cost overruns that occurred as a result of mismanagement. I regret to say that unfortunately ESCOM's copybook has been somewhat tarred in terms of cost overruns, so we caveat our support there. I want to comment, Madam Chair, on the position relating to local IPPs and international purchases. Again, the principle is that ESCOM should be allowed to pass through higher costs. Our assessment is that actually IPPs and international purchases contributed meaningfully to ESCOM's generation capacity. They were absolutely essential during the evaluation period. However, I think we need to make the following observations. If I look at the box on the left with respect to IPPs, There was minimal displacement of capacity, and they were essential, as I've indicated. Only PPA contracted costs should be allowed. We think that the cost associated with Eskom's inability to connect IPPs should be disallowed. That's 642 million. We believe that that was in Eskom's control. And I need to emphasize that going forwards, contracted expenditure will displace Eskom capacity. I'll comment on that more in a moment. With respect to international purchases, likewise, it was essential to ensure sufficient supply. We're satisfied that the entire cost overrun should be allowed. However, they should be disallowed if it's found that they relate to either delays in the build program or outages due to poor maintenance. On IPPs specifically, I would like to highlight that we are extremely concerned about the ramifications of displacement. And we think that Nersa will have to review the tariff mechanism going forwards, as we do not think that the consumer should pay for the excess cost, which is a function, if you like, of the death spiral, the reduced consumer base for Eskom's own sales as a result of displacement. The environmental levy we've raised in previous both RCA applications and the MYPD processes. I'm not going to rehearse the slide in detail now. The revenue adjustment includes a levy of 4.1 cents per kilowatt hour on volume not consumed. Corresponding cost adjustment is 3.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Accordingly, the RCAs provide for a net recovery of 0.6 cents per kilowatt hour on the volume shortfall. We believe that consumers should not be liable for a levy on volumes that are not consumed. Accordingly, we believe the adjustment should be priced at 4.1 cents per kilometre, and we per kilowatt hour, and we quantify it accordingly. The total is some 1.5 billion rand of levy adjustment in the revenue period. On capital expenditure and return on capital, Eskom is entitled to a return on capital currently being phased in, provided it is prudently invested. In the RCA period, capital expenditure exceeded approved capital expenditure by some 41 billion rand. Eskom is seeking to recover a return of 1 billion on this additional capex. We think that if changes emanated from the reprioritization of capital expenditure, as it appears, they were not approved by Nersa. The excess capital is in line with the overspend in the budget, which we think is the result of imprudent expenditure. The over-expenditure was largely as a result of Eskom's own doing. The proposed recovery should be disallowed. Similarly, as I've indicated previously in previous hearings, the excess capital expenditure should not be included in the regulatory asset base going forwards. So the consolidated analysis you can see on the slide that's now in front of you. Our written submission supports the recovery of 40 billion, or 38.9 billion, as opposed to the 66.7 billion that is being claimed. However, as I indicated previously, if RCA principles were to be applied stringently, there's a strong case to be made for lower recoveries, in fact as little as 13 billion rand out of the 67 billion rand. We are, as I stated before, deeply concerned nevertheless about Eskom's ongoing viability, and it needs to have some level of relief in order to enable it to restructure its balance sheet and proceed on a sustainable basis. In conclusion, the RCA applications are at least partially a consequence of Eskom's inability to complete and put into operation the new power stations and inferior maintenance on the existing fleet. Particularly in the early years, demand exceeded installed capacity, as we know. Had the generation fleet been operating optimally, there would have been no need to purchase additional power, either on short-term contracts or from international utilities. Consumers were actually, during this period, forced to reduce their consumption by at least 10% or face load shedding or curtailment, but nevertheless they're required to compensate Eskom both for the revenue shortfall, indicative of the death spiral, and over-expenditure in purchasing additional power. We think that that's incorrect. As I've indicated, our submission provides for generous recoupments of 30 billion in respect of revenue shortfalls versus an estimated 12 upon strict interpretation, and 9 billion in respect of costs versus an estimated 1 billion upon strict interpretation. As I indicated at the outset, the matter of prudency cannot be overemphasized. We have, of course, had previous discussions on an appropriate definition of prudency, and as per Bruce's submission at the recent public hearing on the 1st of March this year, we indicated that prudently incurred expenditure means expenditure that is efficiently incurred, useful, necessary, reasonable, and which allows ESCOM to provide an adequate level of service to its customers. We believe that these are not mutually exclusive, they are inclusive, and each of them need to apply if the expenditure is to be allowed. Our submission provides for recruitment of fixed costs by allowing 70% of the revenue adjustment, but it's possible that Nersa could indeed consider disallowing all of the revenue adjustments for 2014-15 and 15-16 as ESCOM had insufficient capacity to meet improved demand, and adjustments related to the tariff shortfall in 16-17 as international sales should not be subsidised. And as I indicated, should Nersa agree to the fixed cost recovery mechanism, then those fixed costs associated with the lower revenue need to be verified. Nersa should disallow all costs that are not incurred prudently, including costs associated with poor management and poor planning. Our key concerns, as I've indicated, relate to coal cost recovery, other energy costs, international purchases, IPPs, only contracted costs in line with PPAs, the environmental levy, an adjustment should be made to remove the 0.6 cents per kilowatt hour cost on volume shortfalls, and the return on regulated capital limited only to prudently incurred capex. We also believe that Nersa should review the capital expenditure budget of ESCOM, verify the projects that have been undertaken to be only approved projects. The regulatory base should exclude any capex that is not prudently incurred, and any tariff adjustment approved should be phased in over a period of time so as to mitigate the negative effect of the death spiral. And going forwards, we would like to suggest that consideration should be given to the following. In respect of IPPs, an amendment to the tariff mechanism, as the consumer shouldn't pay for higher costs associated with the displacement of ESCOM capacity. Cost management mechanisms to be put in place to ensure that costs are incurred prudently. In particular, cost overruns are of particular concern. And then demand management program, which we think needs to be reassessed, as the material driver to higher tariffs is in fact reduced demand. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kingston. If you have a pen and a paper to write on for the questions from the members. Mr. Green.
Thanks, Chair. Mr. Kingston, I just want to get your view. You made the statement that the cost to be paid should be paid by the correct, I suppose, sector or people. And if I go to the consolidated analysis slide, you've indicated that on strict RCA principles, this would indicate about 12 billion to be recovered. And then 38 is sort of what you would deem to be, I guess, plausible, kind of acceptable. Are you then saying that if we had to follow this, that the other 26 really should come from somewhere else? And who would that be? I think in light of the earlier presentation by ESCOM where they had indicated, I know in your presentation you used the statement inadequate maintenance a number of times, but they've indicated that due to the keep the lights on requirement in the preceding years, that caused the problems in these years. And that was a shareholder compact requirement. So just your view on it. And then the other question I had, the 70% of fixed costs, I'm not quite sure where does that come from. Do you have a study? A number of other people have also used that number, so I might have missed something, so you can just give us some clarity on that. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Fayed. Mr. Nkis.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the presentation, sir. On slide 6, But I still must indicate that you're zooming in directly to the RCA application and dealing with these issues is much appreciated. The slide 6 when talking of non cover overheads, because there's still a fixed element when it comes to the RAB itself that you need to consider. Just want you to get to clarify that comes on your side. Okay. And we talk of international sales that they shouldn't be included. Noting that they come at a lower price. But wouldn't you qualify that by stating that unless maybe ESCOM can provide optimality of this position or decision? Because that's what I think maybe you have to be proven, just to get your comment on that one. You are talking, in terms of the primary energy cost, you are referring to an 8 billion that should be revised downwards. ESCOM in the morning, they talk of a 4.6 billion to be revised downwards.
Sorry, which slide?
Slide 7.
Yes.
Yeah. And then, so your reference is that there's a further 4 billion or 3.4 billion that should be cut out. The issue of maybe sustainability as well as other, also the decisions, what you said about the decisions in the context of the keep the lights on policy decision. I would like to have your comment on that one. You also spoke of coal costs that we should keep them at 10% additional. What is magical about that 10%? For someone to say, why not 12.8? And then for slide 9, I just would like just for completeness, to say the reason then for the removal of the 280 million for this storage and demolish cost, what to proffer there as the reason for this. Thank you.
Mr. Kingston, I would like to just be a little bit more specific on the decision to keep the lights on. My question will be, in the context of utility regulation, where does it say that a shareholder, or maybe let me try to find out your understanding of the regulation of utility, whether the shareholder decisions that have an impact on the operations and the management of the utility, that such decisions should be exempted from holding the utility to account for the performance and efficiencies. Is it your understanding that it is something that is applied in the utility regulation, or is it something that is there in our law here, that decisions made by shareholders of the utility or shareholder management decisions should be exempted, even if they have inefficient outcomes insofar as the utility is managed and its performance is concerned? I just want to understand to what extent do we really take that or account, or the utility should account for such decisions. Now, the second aspect of that decision, now looking at the impact of it, would you then say that if ESCOM says it was not a management decision, it was a shareholder's decision, and it was made within a particular context, now what would be your view on the public interest standard? Would you say that such decision, even with the outcomes that we see, that decision was in the public interest? Would you assist the regulator to understand the impact of that decision, whether we would look at it and say that decision was done in the public interest? And in line with what Eskom has indicated, that it then, within that context, it took actions that it could take to make sure that the lights are kept on. Now, coming to the adjustments, which is the third question, coming to the adjustment on the revenue shortfall, you made mention that only those costs, or only those costs that are caused by external factors. Are you able to assist us in identifying those? Because that for us will be important for the adjustments that we need to make, if any, on the revenue variance. What would you view as external factors that we may have to consider in terms of adjusting the cost associated with the revenue variance? The fourth part of that of the questions, it goes to the submission made by Eskom earlier today regarding any adjustments on the sales volumes, where Eskom indicated that the sales volumes are not subject to any efficiency standards. Is that your understanding? That Eskom therefore should not be held accountable for anything that has to do with efficiencies when it comes to the sales volumes. It has to be what they say based on the estimated demand, that they are going to produce X and they couldn't achieve it, and therefore because they couldn't achieve it, they must be given the difference. Should it be treated like that? If you may respond to those questions, thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Let me try and deal with the two broad, let us call them policy and strategy questions first. If I may, I'll go to the issue of the policy to keep the lights on and the distinction between regulation and, as you put it, law. And contradictions that may exist in the context of the shareholder compact between the shareholder and utility and obligations in terms of regulation. My view is that the focus of the regulation is to ensure that the consumer, in this particular case, bears an appropriate cost, a cost that is directly correlated to prudently incurred expenditure on the one hand, and quantifiable revenue on the other hand. Even to the extent that the shareholder is a proxy for the administration at large, makes policy decisions which are imposed upon Eskom. My view is that's a shareholder matter, it's not an Eskom matter. Eskom has no ability to influence those outcomes, but the consumer shouldn't pay, and if the consumer shouldn't pay, then the taxpayer must pay. There are only two paymasters in this equation. One is the consumer, the other is the taxpayer. We need to distinguish between costs for the country and costs for the consumer. Because neither Eskom nor the consumer have any choice or flexibility in that determination. I believe there's been a confusion about the role of IPPs. Eskom's role is to ensure that IPPs, with whom it is obliged to contract, deliver their power to the consumer under a contract, in fact, with Eskom, and the cost is a pass-through to the consumer, effectively. But the consequence of IPPs is that it displaces existing installed or planned capacity by Eskom, so that when we review the ramifications of Eskom having to charge a higher tariff because its cost base doesn't reduce in terms of its installed capacity, but its revenue base does because it displaced capacity. we're contributing to that set of circumstances. Now, by the way, I'm not criticizing the decision with respect to IPPs. I'm saying we need to distinguish between a policy decision and costs that are legitimately, prudently incurred by ESCOM. I believe it is most unfortunate that we are in 2018 and we do not yet have an approved IRP. Because for most of us, the IRP is the starting point in terms of the role that ESCOM should play in either the production and distribution of its own power, or indeed the distribution or transmission of other people's power. We can't have a coherent, comprehensive discussion until the IRP has been approved and adopted. That will in fact inform the role that ESCOM should play and an appropriate cost structure going forwards for ESCOM, which I think cannot correlate to the costs it is currently carrying. So, I would argue, as I've argued in fact at the last MIPD hearing, that we need to reset the cost base for ESCOM going forwards to what would have been a prudently incurred cost base, and then we need to decide where the associated delta goes, because there's a write-off implicit in that. Somebody's going to have to pay for the write-off. It's actually the taxpayer, it's not the consumer. So that is my view on the, if you like, the interaction between the shareholder compact and the current regulation. It also, I think...
Mr. Kingston, may I just come in? With regards to the cost base for ESCOM, you mentioned in your slide, it's not numbered, but it's the slide that deals with overall concerns. And you've got the second bullet point, or number 3, slide number 3. Okay. So when you say that costs that are not in line with industry standards, can you share with us whether you have done any benchmark so that you can then give us some insight on the industry standards that you have considered, which you're saying that ESCOM's costs are not in line?
So I don't have, Chair, those figures to hand, but we have done work historically, and we're happy to make such work available to, I think, some of the other parties who have presented have also done that. And I would like in that context to answer your last question. Your last question related to adjustments to sales volumes which are not subject to efficiency standards. I think it's part and parcel of the same issue. ESCOM, I believe, has an obligation to provide reliable, predictable, and competitive power. In other words, the issue of prudently incurred costs is absolutely central, and anybody who will look at the definition of prudence, I think that I put up before, will recognize and acknowledge that in order to come to that conclusion, you need to be able to benchmark effectively against competition. In other words, internationally or domestically, what is the competitive cost of producing such power? Being monopoly doesn't give it a license to incur whatever costs it wishes. I think that would hopefully be a common cause, and therefore I think that efficiency is a fundamental ingredient, as is its competitive position. If I may, I'd like to go back to the question asked by Mr. Fawley at the beginning, because I think there was also a policy issue. I partly argued and answered it already, which is the point I made about the fact that the costs need to be made by the correct party. And if there's a delta, who's going to pay for the delta? I'm afraid to say that in the absence of the consumer, it's the shareholder. And the shareholder is a proxy for South Africa. And as the shareholder has only one source of revenue, in the absence of disposing, I suppose, of state assets, That's the taxpayer. And there's a key policy decision that needs to be taken there, because we would argue that ESCOM's consumers should only pay an appropriate tariff for expenditure that is legitimately, prudently incurred. Both legitimately, by the way, and prudently incurred. If it isn't, then it must be borne by someone else. The only someone else is the shareholder. In this case, the Department of Public Enterprises fallen on behalf of the Republic of South Africa, fallen on behalf of South Africa. And that's a painful decision, which I'm sure ESCOM is having to confront right now, because it is going to be obliged to restructure and resize its balance sheet, because the consumer is not capable of assuming the entirety of the burden of ESCOM's balance sheet as currently structured. And we need to understand that. And if the consumer is not going to bear the burden, then unless the lenders are prepared to write off their exposure, and they may have to, it will be the shareholder. There's no other hope. And the sooner we have an honest discussion about that, I think the better, because then we can start to price power appropriately. On the other subjects that were asked, the 70%, the distinction between fixed and variable. So of course the reality is that variable costs, when ESCOM is not producing power, should be disallowed in their entirety. Power is not being consumed, the variable cost must be disallowed in the RCA process. We are trying to establish what we think is a plausible, I think was the word that Mr. Foley used. I didn't use it, but I think it's a very helpful word. A plausible halfway house under the circumstances. So the 70% that you hear about of fixed cost, the 8 billion in respect of the coal that was referred to in a further question, they are, that was question number 5 actually, those are proxies for that. On international sales and a low tariff, we don't think that there should be a cross-subsidy when we find ourselves in a situation where there is load shedding and we have to import power, or indeed that we differentiate between domestic and international sales, or indeed purchases. The reason for the exclusion of diesel and demurrage is the same reason. It should not have been incurred if there had been a properly maintained and operational fleet. The adjustment, and I think the last question of substance, is adjustments on revenue shortfall caused by external factors. So I have to say, Chairperson, that gives me pause for thought. It's actually a very challenging question. I left it till last in the hope that I could think about it as I was answering the other questions. Because in part, your question about the distinction between policy imposition on ESCOM and matters that are the subject of regulation falls into some of the same categories, matters that are within ESCOM's control. But let me give you another couple of examples. If there was an event of force majeure outside of ESCOM's control, it would be domestic, it would be international. It seems to me that that could easily be an external factor that impacts directly upon revenue shortfall. Another example could be, and perhaps it's a good example, is the threat of a ratings downgrade becoming a reality. A ratings downgrade actually impacts on both sides of this equation, not only on ESCOM's customer base, because we'd see a number of their customers that would almost immediately go out of business. Okay, you just exacerbate and accelerate the deaths. We okay? Everybody all right? Okay. But also, Chair, it impacts fundamentally upon Eskom's cost of capital. It's completely outside of Eskom's control. Eskom has no influence over the downgrade. The problem that we have is that we're now in a vicious circle, and I just want to finish if I may on that, Chair. As I said at the outset, Eskom's well-being is a proxy for the well-being of the South African economy. And one feeds directly into and impacts upon the other, in both directions, by the way. We're now in a situation where if we don't address the extremely critical state of Eskom's well-being, it won't just impact upon Eskom. It will impact directly and immediately upon the rest of the economy in a whole host of ways. One of which, of course, will be an immediate downgrade for the country to drought status. Another, of course, will be the impact upon GDP growth prospects, let alone employment prospects in the country. Now, the trouble that we have is you're going to have to decide which is the chicken and which is the egg in this particular situation. And I would argue that exogenous factors that are clearly outside of Eskom's direct control should be taken into consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kingston, for your contribution, and we look forward to any additional information that you may provide to Nersa. Please do so in about 7 days from today. Thank you very much for your views and your proposals. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to break for lunch, and we will have 3 presenters after lunch. Well, it's 2 presenters and Eskom to do a closing remarks and respond to some of the issues raised by stakeholders. I suggest that we break for lunch. It will take 30 minutes for lunch. You will be directed as to where to go for the lunch. Thank you very much.
I know, I just give you your instructions.
Yes, it's cool being there.